And the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo established a political boundary known as the U.S.-Mexico border today. And so through it, a huge region that was formerly Mexico now became the United States. This is what makes these beans so different from all the other beans. Okay? Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and California now become the property of the United States. And the most noteworthy articles concern the protection of land grants and the cultural rights of both Mexicans and Indians living in the region. The treaty protected land grants and tenure rights established during the Spanish as well as the Mexican period. And the treaty guaranteed legitimate land titles in New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and California. Most importantly, with regards to the treaty, was that cultural customs were to be given equal consideration, and Mexicans and Native peoples were not to be discriminated against as they took up citizenship in the new country. The border created from the treaty now turned the Mexican migration experience into immigration. Mexicans now, from now on, were to become immigrants. They now immigrated to their occupied country. Totally different experience than all the other immigrants that we have taken a look at. The black beans, the white beans, and the yellow beans. The brown beans are different now because the border created from the treaty now turned their migration experience into immigration. Let's go and understand the consequences of the war through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo by looking at a documentary on the U.S.-Mexico War.
In the United States, many Americans had become convinced that theirs was a republic for the ages, a model for the rest of the world to follow. The professional army General Winfield Scott had championed throughout his career would help transform the United States into an international power.
There was a popular feeling the United States has this destiny to become a world leader in industrial development, in commercial activity, and even in reference to progress in the arts and sciences and intellectual advance and intellectual achievement. This is all part of this idea of boundlessness, of no limits. This is this romantic notion that through an act of will, individuals, Americans, can achieve this greatness for themselves and for their nation.
But the United States' sudden expansion inflamed an issue that had haunted the nation since birth. Would these lands be slave or free? It was a question that would drive the Republic into civil war. When Generals Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant finally shook hands at Appomattox in 1865, they sought to ease the moment with talk of their experience in Mexico 18 years earlier. Near the end of his life, a disillusioned Ulysses Grant would write of the war with Mexico.
I regard the war as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation.
There were others who shared Grant's opinion that the United States had been at fault.
And if not at fault, that it did not fully live up to its ideology as expressed in the noblest of the American writings on democracy and freedom. This was an aggressive war in which we attacked a neighbor. And however much we may have won from the war, we do not like to look at the way in which we won it.
The lands taken from Mexico had become an important source of wealth for a growing United States. The discovery of gold in California spurred a great westward migration of entrepreneurs and settlers seeking new opportunities. For Native Americans, it was the latest invasion of their homeland and the beginning of another struggle for survival that would continue for generations.
In the far distant past, the world seemed large enough for both the red man and the white man. He once came to trade. He comes now to fight. He covers his face with clouds of jealousy and anger and tells us to be gone. Saint Agya, Sitting Bear.
After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, more than 75,000 Mexicans chose to remain on land which had now become part of the United States. Most would become U.S. citizens, but many would lose the land on which their families had lived for generations.
The United States does not claim them as full citizens. As a matter of fact, immediately almost sets up multiple barriers and multiple obstacles so that they are not considered full citizens, neither they nor the indigenous peoples that were already here either. And Mexico has lost sight of them, has lost them. So what of them? Who, not only who are these people, but they don't have, now they don't have a homeland and they don't have a nation.
In California, even the wealthy Mariano Vallejo was unable to retain his place in the new order. In what many believed was a violation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Vallejo was required to prove the validity of his land grants from Mexico. The legal battle forced him to sell much of his property to pay lawyers. In the end, he lost the rest to Yankee mortgage holders. The wheel of fortune is very fickle, Vallejo would write. It hit me among the first. At the time of his death in 1890, all that remained of his once vast estate was 228 acres, 2 horses, and a cow.
The violence is not just military, but it is a violence of the soul. It is a violence of the spirit, by those who commit that violence as well as by those who are on the receiving end. And from my perspective, we still live that violence. That violence has not healed. We live with the consequences of that violence. And for me, for us to go beyond that is to come to terms with it, is to acknowledge it.
In 1947, Harry Truman became the first U.S. president to ever visit Mexico City.
Unexpectedly, Mr. Truman makes an out-of-the-way stop at the Chapultepec Monument. Here he pays a simple tribute to the memory of Mexican youths who died 100 years ago defending their nation's capital against an American army. All Mexico was tremendously moved by this act.
Truman brought to Mexico a promise.
To observe the doctrine of non-intervention. What it means is that a strong nation does not have the right to impose its will by reason of its strength upon a weaker nation.
The sooner we Mexicans confront how we have been in the presence of the United States, the better we'll be able to relate to the North Americans. Enough of myths that we are the victims of imperialism. Yes, certainly we were, and we were many other things as well. Our conditions in Mexico helped the United States and enabled it to do what it did, and to some degree, what it is doing even today. So for me, it seems that the war is a very important example of what Mexicans should recognize about how we were, what enormous problems we faced in such a critical time as the war, because it is absolutely necessary that we demystify our relations with the United States at a time when we are resolving new boundaries in terms of geopolitics, culture, and economics.
And I think that war, studying that war, it will help for a better future for those two countries that cannot change geography. They have to live together.
Okay, so again, if you take a look at what one historian wrote, that Americans do not like to look at the way in which the United States won the war against Mexico. And as Antonio Castañeda so eloquently put it, that there was a violence of the soul, there was a violence of the spirit, and we still live with the consequences of that violence. Just take a look at the border. Just go and visit San Diego, Tijuana, El Paso, Juárez, Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, Nogales. Understand it. Now, there's the matter of Mexico being occupied by the French.